If you had asked me, 6 months ago, about the nature of human memory, I would have drawn you a diagram. I would have sat you down in my office, the one with the mahogany desk, and the view of the rainy Seattle skyline, and I would have explained the hippocampus. I would have talked about synaptic plasticity, about how memories are essentially electrical, chemical, architectural structures, built by our experiences. I would have told you, with the absolute arrogance of a man with 3 degrees on his wall, that we are nothing more than the sum of what we have seen, heard, and touched. I was a man of measurements. If I couldn't weigh it, scan it, or biopsy it, it didn't exist. My life was a grid of predictable variables. My son, Leo, was the brightest variable in that grid. He was 7 years old. A chaotic whirlwind of scraped knees, missing teeth, and an obsession with space rockets. He was entirely, beautifully, normal. Or so I thought. Our mornings were a symphony of routine. It's important you understand the texture of our lives before the change. You need to smell the burning toast. You need to hear the rain hitting the gutters. Because without understanding the silence of our normal life, you cannot understand the noise that came later. It started on a Tuesday, in November. The Pacific Northwest was drowning in a gray drizzle that hadn't let up for a week. I remember coming into the kitchen, buttoning my cuffs. The smell of dark roast coffee was heavy in the air, my lifeline. Sarah, my wife, was already at the counter, packing Leo's lunchbox. She was humming something off the radio, a soft, distracted sound. "Leo can't find his left shoe," she said, not looking up from the sandwich she was cutting. "Again?" I sighed, checking my watch. "I have grand rounds at 8. I went into the living room. The television was on. Low volume. Some cartoon with bright, flashing colors. Leo was sitting on the rug, surrounded by his plastic astronauts. "Leo! Shoes!" I commanded, using my doctor voice, firm, authoritative. He didn't look up. He was holding one of the plastic figures. A generic astronaut in a white suit. But he wasn't flying it. He wasn't making explosion noises. He was holding it tightly in his small fist, staring at the window. The rain was lashing against the glass, distorting the world outside into a smear of gray and green. "Leo?" I softened my tone. I walked over and knelt beside him. When he turned to me, his eyes were clear. There was no glaze of a daydream. But there was a heaviness there that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was recognition. As if he were trying to place a face he had seen in a crowd. "The wood is heavy, Papa," he whispered. I frowned, glancing at the plastic astronaut. "The plastic? It's light, buddy. Come on, we're late." "Not the plastic," he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing that high-pitched childish lilt. "The beam. It smells like sour wine and sweat. It hurts the shoulder." I froze. My hand hovered over his shoulder. As a neurologist, my brain immediately began to categorize. Word salad? A waking dream? Did he watch a movie he shouldn't have? "What beam, Leo?" I asked, forcing a chuckle. "Are we building a fort?" The moment broke. Leo blinked. And suddenly, he was 7 again. He dropped the astronaut and scrambled up. "No! I need my shoe! It's under the couch!" He ran off, laughing. I stayed kneeling on the carpet for a moment longer than necessary. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. It was a physiological reaction to a sudden drop in temperature, I told myself. Just a draft from the window. The drive to school was uneventful. The windshield wipers beat a rhythmic thump swish, thump swish. Leo sat in the back, kicking his legs, talking about how Saturn had rings made of ice. "Papa," he said, interrupting himself. "Yeah, bud? Why is the sky gray here?" "Because of the clouds. It's rain." "It shouldn't be gray," he murmured, looking out the window. "It should be heavy. Like gold that's been melted. And the dust, it gets in your teeth." I looked at him in the rearview mirror. He was rubbing his teeth with his tongue, grimacing, as if he could actually taste grit. "Did you get sand in your mouth at the playground?" I asked, scanning his face for signs of fever. "No," he said simply. "Not sand. Dust. From the road. The one leading up the hill." "Which hill?" He didn't answer. He had gone back to playing with the zipper on his jacket. I dropped him off at the school gates. I watched him run toward his friends, his yellow raincoat a bright beacon in the gloom. He looked so small. So fragile. I felt a surge of protective instinct, the kind that makes your chest ache. I waved until he disappeared inside the building. I drove to the hospital. My sanctuary of logic. I spent the day looking at MRI scans, black and white cross-sections of human consciousness. I traced tumors. I identified lesions. I comforted parents with diagnoses that, while terrible, were at least explainable. We knew the how, even if we didn't always like the why. But as I sat in my office late that afternoon, the rain still drumming against the glass, I couldn't focus on the charts. I kept hearing Leo's voice. "It smells like sour wine and sweat." 7-year-olds don't know what sour wine smells like. They don't know the specific, mechanical pain of a heavy beam on a shoulder. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah. "Hey," she answered, sounding breathless. "Just leaving the gym. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just checking in. Did Leo sleep okay last night?" "Like a log." "Why? Did he watch anything weird lately? Any historical documentaries? Anything violent?" "Elias, he watches Space Patrol and Puppy Dog Pals." "You know that. Why are you asking?" "He said something odd this morning. About heavy wood and sweat." Sarah laughed. "He probably heard you complaining about your CrossFit class." I forced a laugh along with her. "Yeah. You're probably right. Listen, I'll be home by 6. I hung up. I wanted to believe her. Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. He overheard a conversation. He has an active imagination. He is a child. But when I got home that evening, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. It wasn't the warm, cozy shelter it had been that morning. The lights seemed dimmer. The shadows in the hallway seemed longer. I found Leo at the kitchen table. He was drawing. Usually, he drew rockets with flames shooting out the back, or stick figures of our family. I walked up behind him. "Whatcha drawing, buddy?" He didn't cover the paper. He didn't look up. He was using a black crayon. He was pressing down so hard that the wax was crumbling, leaving thick, jagged flakes on the paper. It wasn't a rocket. It was a crowd. A chaotic mess of black lines representing people. But they weren't standing in a line. They were swarming. And in the center there was a figure. He hadn't drawn the figure's face. He had just drawn the back. A bent back. And across it, a long, thick, black line. "What is this, Leo?" I asked, my voice tight. "The walk," he whispered. I leaned closer. He had drawn something else. In the sky, above the scribbled crowd. It wasn't a sun. It wasn't a cloud. He had grabbed the yellow crayon and colored the entire top half of the page a deep, oppressive, sickly yellow. "Why is the sky yellow, Leo?" He stopped drawing. He looked up at me. And for a second, I didn't see my 7-year-old son. I saw someone ancient. Someone who had seen empires fall. "Because the sun is hiding, Papa," he said. "The sun is afraid to watch what they are doing to him." A chill, colder than the Seattle rain, went straight through my marrow. "Who is him, Leo?" He pointed to the figure with the bent back. "The healer," he said. "The one who told the wind to be quiet." Diagnosis is a process of elimination. You strip away the impossible until you are left with the probable. If a child has a fever, you check for infection. If a child has a seizure, you check for epilepsy. But what do you check for when your 7-year-old son wakes up screaming in a language that hasn't been spoken colloquially for 2,000 years? The escalation was subtle at first. Like a crack in a windshield. A bad dream here, a mood swing there. But 2 weeks after the drawing of the yellow sky, the dam broke. It was 3:17 a.m. I know the time because the red digits of the alarm clock burned themselves into my retinas. The scream didn't sound like Leo. It was guttural. Raw. A sound ripped from the throat of a grown man in agony. Sarah and I were out of bed and down the hall in seconds. The hallway floor was cold, but when I burst into Leo's room, the air hit me like a physical wall. It was hot. Oppressively, dryly hot. The kind of heat you feel when you open an oven door. Leo was thrashing in his bed. His sheets were soaked in sweat, tangling around his legs. "Leo! Leo, wake up!" Sarah cried, reaching for him. "Don't touch him," I warned instinctively. In a seizure, you don't restrain the patient. But this wasn't a seizure. Leo was arching his back, his eyes squeezed shut. His hands were clawing at his wrists. Not scratching an itch, he was gripping his own wrists, as if trying to pull something out of the flesh. Then he spoke. It wasn't the babbling of a night terror. It was distinct. Consonants clashed against the back of his throat. It sounded like rocks grinding together. "Aloyd! Aloy lama!" He gasped, a terrible, rattling sound, as if his lungs were collapsing under fluid. "Sabachthani?" I froze. I didn't know the words then. I am a man of science, not scripture. I hadn't stepped foot in a church since my own childhood. But the cadence, it felt ancient. It felt heavy. Suddenly, Leo's body went limp. The tension vanished. He collapsed back onto the mattress, his chest heaving. The oppressive heat in the room seemed to dissipate instantly, replaced by the cool draft of the air conditioning. Sarah was weeping, stroking his damp hair. "He's burning up, Elias. He's burning up." I touched his forehead. He wasn't just feverish, he was radiating heat. But within seconds, under my hand, his temperature plummeted back to normal. It was physiologically impossible. Thermoregulation doesn't work that way. "We're going to the hospital," I said, my voice shaking. Now. The next 3 days were a blur of sterile lights, waiting rooms, and the hum of machinery. I called in favors. I got the best pediatric neurologists in the state. Dr. Aris Thorne, the brilliant skeptic, was now the desperate father pacing the hallway in wrinkled scrubs. We ran the gamut. MRI. CT scan. Blood panels checking for everything from heavy metals to rare autoimmune encephalitis. I stood in the viewing room with Dr. Chin, the radiologist. The MRI images of Leo's brain glowed on the monitors, slices of gray matter, the architecture of my son's mind. "It's clean, Elias," Chin said, pointing at the screen. "No tumors. No lesions. No inflammation. Structurally, his brain is perfect." "It can't be perfect," I snapped. "He hallucinates. He speaks in tongues. He experiences phantom pain in his wrists and feet. Look at the limbic system again. I've looked 10 times. It's normal. In fact," Chen hesitated. "What?" "It's hyperactive. The hippocampus, the memory center, it's lighting up like a Christmas tree, even when he's sedated. It's showing activity levels we usually only see during intense recall. Not imagination. Recall. He's remembering things? Physiologically? Yes. He's accessing memories. Deep ones." We took him home with a prescription for sedatives and a diagnosis of acute stress disorder. A placeholder. A medical shrug. But the house was no longer a home. It was a waiting room for the next event. Leo changed. The playful boy who loved rockets was gone. In his place was a solemn, weary observer. He walked differently, slower, as if his body carried a weight we couldn't see. One evening, I found him in the kitchen. He wasn't drawing this time. He was sitting at the table with a bowl of olives, something he had always hated. He was eating them slowly, spitting the pits into his hand. "Leo?" I asked gently. He looked at me. His eyes were dark. Dilated. "The water is bad today," he said. "We have filtered water, Leo. It's fine. No. He shook his head. In the city. The cisterns are cracked. The Romans, they don't care if we get sick. They only care about their baths. I sat down opposite him. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Who are the Romans, Leo? The Iron Men? He whispered. They march. Clank. 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 You have to look down when they pass. If you look them in the eye, they strike you. He touched his cheek, flinching as if expecting a blow. Leo, look at me. Is this a game? Did you learn this at school? He ignored me. He looked past me, staring at the modern refrigerator as if it were a ghost. I saw him today, Leo said softly. Who? The carpenter. He was arguing with the Pharisee near the temple steps. He wasn't shouting. He was quiet. Like the center of a storm. What did he look like? I asked, testing him. Expecting the Sunday school answer. Blonde hair, blue eyes, white robe. Leo frowned. He looks like dust. His hands are rough, Papa. Like yours when you fixed the deck? But rougher. He has a scar on his eyebrow. From a stone, when he was a boy. I stopped recording. A scar on the eyebrow? That wasn't in any Bible I knew of. That wasn't in any movie. That was a specific, intimate detail of a human life. Leo, I said, my voice trembling. How do you know that? He looked at me, and a tear leaked out of his eye. Because I was there. He whispered. I was holding the basket. I saw the stone hit him. That night, the whispering started again. But this time, I didn't run to the room. I stood outside the door, listening. He was speaking rapidly. A stream of complex sounds. It wasn't gibberish. It had structure. It had syntax. I recorded 10 minutes of it. The next morning, I made a call I never thought I'd make. I didn't call a doctor. I called the University of Washington, Department of Linguistics. I need someone who specializes in dead languages, I told the receptionist. Latin? Ancient Greek? Older, I said, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. Middle Eastern. Semitic. I don't know what it is. But I need someone to listen to my son. I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The sky was a pale, bruised purple. Down in the yard, Leo was standing by the old oak tree. He wasn't playing. He was kneeling in the mud, washing his hands in a puddle, over and over again. I realized then that my medical degree was useless. I wasn't fighting a disease. I was fighting history itself. When you invite the impossible into your living room, it doesn't knock. It sits on your sofa and drinks your coffee. 3 days after I made the call, my dining room had been transformed into a makeshift command center. I had moved the fruit bowl and the placemats. In their place sat a high-fidelity reel-to-reel player, a stack of reference books bound in crumbling leather, and 2 people who looked entirely out of place in a suburban Seattle home. Professor Miriam Vale was a woman of sharp angles and sharper eyes. She was the chair of Semitic languages at the university. She smelled of dust and peppermint tea. With her was Dr. Simon Halloway, a historian of the 1st century Judea, a man who looked like he had spent more time in excavation trenches than in sunlight. You understand, Dr. Thorne, Miriam said, adjusting her glasses, that we receive calls like this once a month. Glossolalia, speaking in tongues, is a common phenomenon in religious hysteria. It's usually gibberish. Repeated syllables mimicking the cadence of language. I know what glossolalia is, I said, my voice tight. I'm a neurologist. This isn't that. Just listen. I pressed play on the digital recorder connected to their speakers. The room filled with the sound of rain against the window, and then Leo's voice. The deep, guttural rasp I had heard in the night. Kumeli, la, Tammy. Miriam's hand, which had been reaching for her tea, stopped in midair. Her eyes widened behind her thick lenses. She looked at the speaker, then at me, then back at the speaker. The voice on the tape continued, faster now, urgent. Abba, Abba, Kifa, Simon. Miriam slowly lowered her cup. It rattled against the saucer. "Play it again," she whispered. I rewound. I played it. "It's not Hebrew," Holloway muttered, leaning forward, his skepticism evaporating like mist. "The vowels, they're too flat." "It's Aramaic," Miriam said, her voice trembling. "But it's not the Aramaic we teach. It's rough. Rural. Galilean dialect. 1st century. She looked at me, pale. "Dr. Thorne, where did your son learn this?" "There are maybe 50 people on the planet who can speak this dialect with this specific inflection. And they are all over 60 years old and work in academia." "He watches cartoons?" I said flatly. "He goes to 2nd grade. He doesn't have a Rosetta Stone under his pillow." Miriam stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where Leo was sitting on the swing set. He wasn't swinging. He was just sitting there, staring at his feet. "Can I speak to him?" she asked. "Be careful," I warned. "He's fragile." We brought Leo inside. He looked small in the oversized dining chair. He wore his favorite dinosaur t-shirt, but his posture was that of an old man, slumped, hands clasped tightly on his lap, thumbs rubbing together nervously. Miriam sat across from him. She didn't treat him like a child. She treated him like a witness. "Shlama," she said softly. "Peace." Leo looked up. His eyes were heavy. He didn't blink. "Shlama," he replied. But he corrected her pronunciation. He softened the sh, making it sound like wind through reeds. Miriam took a sharp breath. She switched to English, but she was shaking. "Leo," she said. "My name is Miriam. I want to ask you about the man you saw." "The carpenter." Leo nodded slowly. "The teacher." "Yes. The teacher. Can you tell me, what was he wearing?" Holloway, the historian, leaned in. This was the test. The popular image of Jesus, the blue sash, the white robe, was a Renaissance invention. "Not white," Leo said, his voice raspy. "Wool. Undyed. It was itchy. He had a mantle. Blue tassels. One was ripped." Holloway exchanged a look with Miriam. "That's it," he whispered. "The fringes." "Leo," Holloway asked, "where were you standing?" "By the water," Leo said. "The smell, fish guts and salt. The boats were pulled up. Simon was angry. He was shouting about the nets. They were torn." "Simon Peter?" Holloway asked. "Just Simon," Leo corrected. "He has a loud voice. He smells like wet dog and fish." The teacher put a hand on his shoulder. Simon stopped shouting. He just sat down in the mud. Leo closed his eyes. The room was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. "He told them a story," Leo whispered. "About a seed. A tiny seed. Mustard. The parable of the mustard seed," I interjected. "Everyone knows that story." Leo shook his head violently. "No. Not the story in the book. He told it differently. He said the seed doesn't want to grow. The seed is afraid of the dark earth. It has to die to become the tree. He said, 'Fear not the burial, for it is the beginning of the sky.'" Miriam gasped. She grabbed her notebook and scribbled furiously. "That phrase," she murmured. "Fear not the burial. That's not in the Gospels. That's not in the canon. But it fits the linguistic structure of the saying's source. The Q source." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "Dr. Thorne, your son is quoting lost oral tradition. He is reciting verse that hasn't been written down for 2,000 years. The air in the room grew heavy. The smell of old paper seemed to intensify, or maybe it was just the dust of history settling on us. Holloway wasn't satisfied. He needed concrete proof. Geographical proof. "Leo," Holloway said, pulling a large, detailed map of 1st century Jerusalem out of his bag. He spread it on the table. It was an archaeological reconstruction, a maze of walls and temples. Can you show me where you went? When you went to the city? Leo looked at the map. He looked confused. This is wrong, he said, pointing a small finger at the Temple Mount. That is the second temple, Holloway said gently. Based on the writings of Josephus and current excavations. It's the most accurate map in the world. No, Leo insisted. He tapped a spot near the southern wall. The stairs don't go straight. They turn here. Because of the bedrock. And there is a shop here. A money changer. He has a red awning. And here. Leo traced a line away from the temple, down into the city of David. Here is the pool, he said. Siloam. Yes, the pool of Siloam. Holloway nodded. But there are steps missing, Leo said. 5 steps. Then a landing. Then 5 steps. And the water, it comes from a mouth. A lion's mouth. Carved in the stone. Holloway froze. He went completely still. A lion's mouth? He asked, his voice barely audible. Yes. It's chipped. The bottom tooth is gone. Holloway fell back in his chair, his face draining of color. He looked like he was about to be sick. Simon? Miriam asked. What is it? Holloway looked at me, fear in his eyes. Pure, unadulterated fear. We just finished a dig at the Siloam pool 3 months ago. Holloway stammered. The report isn't published. It's not even written yet. We found a spout. A relief carving. It was a lion's head. And the bottom tooth was broken off. The silence that followed was absolute. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick. 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 My son. My 7-year-old boy who liked peanut butter sandwiches. Knew the architectural details of a buried ruin in Jerusalem that only a handful of archaeologists had seen. It's not memory, I whispered, the realization crashing down on me. It's not genetic memory. It's not a past life. I looked at Leo. He wasn't looking at the map anymore. He was staring at the corner of the room, his eyes fixed on something we couldn't see. He's here, Leo whispered. Miriam jumped. Who? The Roman, Leo said, his voice trembling with terror. The one with the spear. He followed us. Suddenly, Leo grabbed his own side, just below the ribs. He screamed. It wasn't a scream of surprise. It was the scream of a body being violated. Blood, bright, arterial red, began to bloom on his white dinosaur t-shirt. I didn't think. I moved. Leo! I ripped his shirt up. There was no wound. The skin was unbroken. But the blood was there, seeping through the pores, a stigmata of a wound that wasn't his. He pierced him! Leo shrieked, his back arching off the chair. He pierced the side! Water and blood! Water and blood! Miriam was praying in Hebrew. Holloway was backing away, knocking over a stack of books. I held my son, my hands slick with inexplicable blood, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look for a diagnosis. I looked for a priest. The blood on Leo's shirt didn't coagulate. It simply faded. Like watercolor drying on canvas, the red stain evaporated into the air, leaving only the smell of iron and ozone in the room. Miriam was weeping silently in the corner. Holloway was staring at his hands, his worldview fractured beyond repair. But I was looking at my son. Leo sat up. The pain was gone. The confusion was gone. His posture changed again. He didn't look like a child, nor an old man. He looked royal. There is no other word for it. A dignity settled on his small shoulders that made the room feel vast, like a cathedral. Papa, he said. But he wasn't speaking to me. He looked at me, but his eyes were focusing on something infinite. He wants to speak, Leo said. His voice was no longer raspy. It was clear. Resonant. It vibrated in the chest cavities of everyone in the room. Who? I whispered. The one who remembers, Leo answered. I sank to my knees. Not out of reverence, but out of weakness. The air pressure in the room had dropped. The silence was deafening. "Leo?" I asked. "Are you there?" Leo closed his eyes. When he opened them, the irises seemed darker, almost black. "Elias," the voice said. It wasn't Leo's voice. It wasn't Aramaic. It was English, but spoken with a cadence that suggested the speaker was tasting the words for the first time, finding them strange and clunky. "You look for the mechanism," the voice continued through my son's mouth. "You look for the synapse. You measure the spark, but you miss the fire." I couldn't breathe. "Who are you?" "I am the memory," the voice said. "I am the dust on the road. I am the water in the jar." Miriam stepped forward, her hands trembling. Are you him?" The boy turned his head slowly. A smile touched his lips, a smile of such profound sorrow and kindness that it broke my heart just to look at it. "I am the echo," the voice said. "The stone was thrown. The ripples are still moving. You call it history. We call it now." Leo stood up. He walked over to the window. The rain had stopped completely. The clouds had parted, and a single shaft of late afternoon sunlight hit the glass, illuminating him in a halo of gold dust. "Why?" I choked out. "Why, my son? Why, Leo?" Leo turned back to me. "Because you record," the voice said. "You are a healer of the mind, Elias. You understand that memory is what keeps the dead alive." He walked closer to me. He placed a small hand on my forehead. His skin was warm. "The world is forgetting," the voice whispered. "They build temples of stone, but they forget the temple of flesh. They fight over the words, but they forget the voice. We needed a vessel. Pure. Unbroken. To remind you." "Remind us of what?" Holloway asked, his voice cracking. "That death is not a wall," the boy said. "It is a door. And love is the hinge." Leo looked at me, piercing me with that ancient gaze. "Elias, you worry for the boy. You think he is broken." "Yes," I wept. "I just want my son back. He is here. He has always been here. He is strong. Stronger than you know. He carried the beams so you wouldn't have to." The light in the room grew blindingly bright. For a split second, I didn't see my living room. I saw a hill. I saw olive trees twisting in the wind. I smelled dry heat and cedarwood. I heard the sound of a hammer striking iron, clang, 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 but it wasn't a sound of torture. It was the sound of construction. Of something being built that would last forever. Then Leo gasped. The light vanished. The heavy atmosphere lifted instantly. Leo blinked. He looked around the room, confused. He looked at Miriam, then at Holloway, then at me. He looked down at his clean shirt. "Papa?" he asked, his voice high and childish again. "Is dinner ready? I'm hungry." I grabbed him. I hugged him so hard I thought I might crush him. I sobbed into his neck, smelling his shampoo, his sweat, the smell of my boy. "Yes, Leo," I cried. "Yes, dinner is ready.